Did you know Leah Thomas before he joined the women's swim team at UPenn and started competing sort of alongside with you?
Yes. So his name was Will back in the day, and he was a member of the men's team. He was a grade older than me, actually. So from the moment I showed up on campus at 18 years old, I knew there was a member of the men's team named Will Thomas. And he was Will all through my freshman year. And then my sophomore year, he informed us that he was transitioning to the women's team and now wanted to be referred to with she, her pronouns. And in that period, he hadn't actually changed his name yet. So he wanted to be she, her, but his name was still William. And then it was the year after he announced that his name was now Leah. So I knew him the entire time. I knew him for a year as a man. I knew him for a year in the middle during his transition, whatever that might even mean. And then obviously I got to know him as my teammate, Leah, my senior year. At this point, it was, it had been 3 years since I'd first been introduced to him.
Wow. So how did William swim on the women's team, or on the men's team rather? Was he a good swimmer, a bad swimmer, an okay swimmer? What was his record like?
Yes. So something to keep in mind is Ivy League swimming is not known for producing Olympians and NCAA champions. Of course, it does happen occasionally. There's always an exception to the rule. But that being said, for the most part, we're not producing NCAA champions. That is mostly the SEC schools. That's, Stanford, those big sports schools. The Ivy League is not known for any of this athletics whatsoever. So I just want to make that clear. So within the Ivy League, Thomas was actually a good male swimmer. He placed second in Ivies in his events, but he never qualified for the NCAA championship. That is, again, the highest level competition in college swimming. It's an honor to qualify for the meet. It's very hard. Only top 35 roughly in each event get to go of hundreds and thousands of college swimmers. And so he never qualified for the NCAA championship as a man. To put that into perspective, when he switches over to the women's team, he breaks every record in every event that he swims on our team. He went on to break Ivy League records. He went on to win best women's swimmer in the Ivy League at the end of the season. And also he won an event at the NCAA championship. So he went from never having qualified for the meet at all on the men's side to winning an event outright. That is a huge gap. That's a very big difference to, again, go from having not qualified for the meet to winning an event is unheard of. And so that, I think, really shows the perspective of, yes, he was okay comparatively in the Ivy League, but he was really just became the best of the best. The athletes that he beat at the NCAA championship and the event that he won were Olympic medalists. Second, third, and fourth place have medals from the Olympics. And he beat them. So
and I don't know what else. Was he like smashing school records on the women's team too?
He broke the record in every single event that he swam for our team.
Every single event? And
Every
he just
event.
took those accolades away from
Yes.
women on that went to
Yeah, and he also won Ivy League Swimmer of the Meet. So at our conference championship, the Ivy League championship, right, the woman who scores the most points gets an award. And he was the female athlete that was chosen for that, although he's not even female. So, wow. I mean, again, and to say the honor of being a high point swimmer of the meet, it's a great honor. And again, that was robbed from another Ivy League athlete.
That's crazy. Can you tell me the story of sort of, I guess, the day or week or the sort of culmination of events that led up to you finding out that Leah Thomas, formerly this person that you knew as William, is now joining your swim team as a woman? Like what it was like with your coach and your team and all of that.
It was crazy. So, I mean, I joined the University of Pennsylvania swim team in 2018, my freshman year of college. And my first year, there was no men swimming on our team. There was no any of this stuff. But we show up for sophomore year. It's September. Our season hadn't begun yet. We're in preseason. And our coach said we had a mandatory team meeting. And interestingly, we're a combined program, meaning we have the same head coach for the men and the women. So normally we do a lot of things with the men's team. And this one team meeting, he said, the men are going to go first and then you guys are going to go after. And I remember thinking that was so bizarre because there's almost never anything the men's team needs to hear. And we also need to hear, but it would need to be separate. So So the men go and do their meeting, and we're waiting for this meeting to start. Finally, the men leave. They don't say a single word to us. They go to their locker room. They start getting ready for practice. And we go into the team room where this meeting was. And I noticed this guy, Will Thomas, was waiting back. And I remember thinking, oh, maybe he has a question for the coach. Like, why would he still be here? This is supposed to be a women's team meeting. And our coach just looks at all of us and starts the meeting and just says, Will, this is your meeting. And then before he even spoke, I said, what could a member of the men's team possibly have to tell us women? What could possibly be happening right now? And in under 30 seconds, he just looked at all of us and said, guys, I am transitioning to your team next season. Please refer to me now with she, her pronouns. That was it. There was no further discussion. And at this point, I thought that it was the funniest thing in the entire world. I was laughing because I thought there was no way this could actually be serious. There's no way that this is actually happening right now. But I looked behind me and all my teammates, and they're clapping. They're saying, congrats. We're so proud of you for coming out to us. We're so proud of you for being your authentic self. And I realized very quickly that this was not a practical joke. This was a nightmare. And obviously it ended up being as, crazy as I possibly could have imagined. I mean, he went on to become an NCAA champion, all of these different things that happened in the following years. But in that moment, I couldn't wrap my brain around it. It was so unheard of. And I found out that the NCAA does allow it. You just need to take testosterone suppressant for 1 year and you can join any women's team in the country. And that was what the rule was.
That's insane. What year was that?
So this meeting was in 2019. And so it was not until 2 years later that it actually became reality, because we had a gap year because of COVID. So
Right.
there's no Ivy League sports whatsoever in the 2020 to 2021 season.
Yeah.
And so it was really a slow moving train wreck. I mean, I always, for those 2 years that I knew about it, I thought, surely the NCAA will change their rules. Surely the Ivy League will come in and say enough is enough. Like, somebody will do something, or somebody will figure this out. And I remember I would even tell my friends about it on other sports teams or just other students at the school. And everyone just said, Paula, you sound crazy. There's no way that's real. And so it really was like a slow moving train wreck to becoming reality, right? I tried for so long to talk about it and everyone just said, there's no way, it's not real.
And at that time, this wasn't really a super popular thing at the time. I imagine it was kind of bizarre, like you said, for you, like total blindside, right?
Yeah, I mean, nowadays, right, you can go on Google and find like 4,000 stories of
Right.
male athletes taking away female opportunities. At this point in time, the only one I'd heard of was actually in my home state of Connecticut. There was a track case. But again, there was very limited details about it. I knew that they were in litigation. It was, there wasn't really a lot of lawyers talking about it. There wasn't a lot of media talking about it. Like, if you even looked up stories, you couldn't really find them. Even organizations to support female athletes exist back then. There was no, call this number or go on this website if you're experiencing this, which we've done a great job now to set up and make sure that when there are stories and there are girls who want to fight back against this, there's opportunities and resources for them to do so.
Yeah, fascinating. So after it became a reality, after COVID, after the gap year, all that, what was it like sort of behind the scenes, not during competitions? Like, was Leah Thomas changing in the locker rooms with you guys on an all-girls team?
Yes. And so originally so after this first meeting, right, there was a lot of people. So everyone was clapping in the room publicly, but privately, a bunch of girls, we'd have one-on-one meetings with each other. We would talk to our coaches, all of that, and talk about how uncomfortable we were with it. And so originally we were actually told that Thomas was going to be changing in the single stall family locker room outside our locker room. That is originally what we were told was going to happen. But 2 years later, when it eventually became a reality, I remember I was looking at the locker chart. We had a new assistant coach and he reassigned everyone's lockers. And I looked down and I saw that Thomas had a locker like everyone else. And at this point I said, okay, so he's going to be in our locker room and there's nothing we can do about it. And I actually had a teammate. So I was super fortunate. Our locker room is sort of shaped like an L, and I was at one end and he was at the other. So I was as far away from him as I could have been. But one of my close friends actually wasn't. And she had the locker right next to him. And she went to her coach. No, yeah. And she went to her coach and said, this is a joke, right? There's no way you expect me to undress next to this man. And our coach was
And
just like, I'm sorry, my hands are tied.
and you guys undress out in the open, right? Like it's not like you hop in a stall.
Yes.
Yeah, and you guys, I
Yes. And
mean,
also, swimming is one of the sports where you are very exposed changing in and out of your suit. Like, it's not like other sports where you're not like soaking wet, right?
yeah.
But we were changing 18 times a week in the locker room. We have 9 practices a week. You have to change into your suit before practice and change out. That's 18 times you're changing, and that's every week. That's not that like, every single week for the entire year. And so one of that same teammate, my friend who had the locker next to him, she changed out in that family locker room we were originally told he was supposed to change in. And
Oh
she did
wow.
it every single practice, and everyone knew what she was doing. She would grab her stuff, walk out to the hallway, tiptoe back in. Everyone knew what she was doing. It was just one of those situations where, again, and if people who tried to raise concerns about it, we were called names. We were told we were transphobic. We were told we were homophobic. It was every single aspect of it was just, if you brought up any concerns, you were immediately shut down. You were immediately called names. It was crazy.
And I mean, like, swimming athletes, you guys are wearing bathing suits just like everyone else. There's nothing under them, right? Like, it's not like you've
Yeah.
got like a sports bra and underwear under them. Like, you get fully undressed in front of this man in your locker room, and he does the same in front of you guys, right?
Yes, and I think the other thing is like racing suits. So no, practice suits are pretty easy to get in and out of, but racing suits, I'm not even exaggerating when I say this, they take 20 minutes to change into.
Really?
Because
Wow.
they're this small, and I'm not even like, they are this tiny. Like, I remember when I first ordered my first racing suit, my mom told me that she thought it could fit an American Girl doll closer than it could to fitting me. Um, and that's just like, I hopefully you've seen those dolls, you know how big they are, but. That is a lot of time you're exposed. And I know, like, even growing up swimming, it's people are helping you. Your friends are like, digging their hands in your suit. You're accidentally flashing people because they're so hard to get the straps on. I mean, it's not a place where you're modest whatsoever. And I played other sports growing up. You're very exposed swimming. Like, the swimming locker room is probably one of the most exposing places you could be. And so I think that's what makes it so crazy, is like this was a sports team where everyone is so open and changing and exposed and all this stuff, and they're just like, and you should do it with someone on the men's team now. Yeah, it was just, I mean, I would never want anyone else to experience that. And honestly, even like during it, I suppressed a lot of my emotions and like really how disturbing it actually was.
Yeah. And so here's a question that I didn't actually have written down. Did you have any kind of indication of like what Leah Thomas's sexuality was? Was this person attracted to men or attracted to women? Like, because that's a whole nother sort of risk factor there. Is like if he likes women, and
Yeah.
what
He
do you have?
previously dated a member of the women's team.
Oh, that is
Yeah.
really bad. Okay, and that didn't change to your knowledge when he joined the women's team.
They had broken up by the time he officially joined the team,
Right.
and she had also I don't really want to like call him
No,
out,
no,
but
sure.
she had
Yeah,
also
totally.
graduated already. So
Interesting.
yeah, it just, yes, it was confirmed that he liked women because he was dating a woman. And I think that, again, that's what made it so uncomfortable for a lot of people. Is that, this person has clearly had a history of dating women before. And again, that's why they also called it like homophobic, right? Like, if we object to changing with him and he's attracted to women, he's actually a
Oh,
lesbian,
yeah,
so we're
wow.
homophobic. And to the people who bring up that argument all the time, if you don't understand the difference between undressing with another woman that happens to like women versus a man, there's a clearly a difference. And a lot of people on the other side kind of like to make that argument, and it's like there's a very distinct difference between a man being naked around you versus a woman, regardless of sexuality, right? So
And at this time, when Leah Thomas is now on your team and changing in your locker room, getting totally naked in your locker room, watching you guys get totally naked, drop my pen. What did Leah Thomas look like? Like, I mean, from photos I've seen, it seems like basically looked like a dude with long hair. I mean, did he seem feminine in any way? What did he just seem like a dude with long hair? What's the breakdown on that?
yeah, I mean, you've seen the pictures. That is exactly that. I mean, Even when he announced the transition to us, he was still, so after that meeting we originally had, he was still changing the men's locker room. So he was like, I'm she, her, but in the year of transitioning, when he was still competing for the men, he was still changing in the men's locker room, still dressing very masculine. I mean, later on, I mean, at graduation, I think he was wearing like a dress and heels. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think if you didn't know anything and you saw him walking around campus, you would probably just think that that was a member of the men's team.
Wow.
And so, and again, like that's the other thing is it's just so interesting. It's again, like you can just grow your hair out and that is now the standard for saying, and you're welcome in all women's spaces and teams and all these opportunities. And that is basically what we were told. Like, this is how we identify, deal with it.
Wow. And what was, so you touched on this a little bit, like what was the atmosphere, especially as time went on, like with the team? I mean, do you feel that the majority of people supported Leah Thomas? The majority of people were over it. Maybe they supported Leah Thomas, but also didn't want a dude changing in their locker room. What was that like?
Yeah, so at the beginning of when it first started happening, I think it was a lot of unknowns. It was right, like we had taken so much time off from swimming because of COVID. It was unclear how fast he was even going to swim, you know, all these different variables and factors. But you could have one-on-one conversations with pretty much everyone on the team, and people would say, this is unfair. I mean, I had teammates who were crying because they lost their relay spot to him, or they were bumped off the roster because he was chosen to go to these meets. And I experienced all of that. But interestingly, it was pretty open. Like, you could go up to pretty much anyone on the team. I would say at least 85% of the girls on the team, and they would agree to some extent, whether it was the athletic part or the locker room part, that it was incredibly unfair. But as time went on, the administration wanted to make sure that they had the situation under control. So once the media started to get attention of him, so eventually, right, he ended up winning a race by over 30 seconds. And if you know anything about swimming, races are won to the millisecond. So 32 seconds is crazy to win by. And so the media figured out that this person had never existed before and had been William on the men's team for 3 years prior. And the school at this point realized they had to come in and do damage control. So we had a mandatory team meeting, and they told Leah not to come to this meeting. They said, this meeting is mandatory for everyone on the women's team except for Leah.
Wow.
And they bring us this panel of people. There were at least 12 people there from what I counted. And it was administrators, it was people from the LGBT center, it was like conflict resolution managers, like random administrators from the university that shouldn't have jobs, but they do because it's a bureaucracy college.
Wow.
And they sat us down and they literally just said, this is a non-negotiable. Leah will be on this team whether you like it or not. You might as well stay quiet. They told us we would never be able to find a job if we spoke out against it. They said we will regret it. They told us that this is the next civil rights movement and you'll be tainted the same way people who didn't want to share bathrooms with people of color were back in the day. Yeah, it was, they compared it, they kept on making this comparison of like segregation.
No way.
And they kept on just, again, you will regret it. Nothing you can do about it. You'll lose that job. They'll search you up online and see that you're a hateful bigot and you'll never be able to get hired anywhere.
It turns out that's true. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, well, funny enough, I mean, quick sidebar. I mean, I worked the corporate job I was supposed to after graduating, and I spoke out about this, and I did not lose my job over my opinions. I know some people probably do and have, but I didn't. And so that was an empty threat. But anyway, in this conversation, they, kept on saying all this stuff. And at the very end, they said, if you still object to everything that we've told you, please seek psychological services. And here's the number for a therapist.
Wow.
And after this meeting, you couldn't have those one-on-one conversations anymore. A lot of teammates, again, I had classes with, I was friends with, they would not speak about it. They would say, I'm not talking about it.
They were afraid.
Exactly. And I had friends who swam for other Ivy League schools, and I reached out to a lot of them. And one of my closest friends from childhood who I swam with went to a different Ivy League school, and I texted her to ask, how's your school handling it? Like, what do you think? And she texted me back, do not talk to me. I'm not allowed to speak about this.
Whoa.
And so it wasn't even my school. And then I later found out the girls at Harvard were sent a letter in writing that said, if you spoke out against this, you would contribute to someone committing suicide. in writing.
Oh
They were
my
told
God.
that.
Is that letter out there? Like, can you find it?
Yeah, I can probably send it to you
Yeah,
after.
please.
But yeah, we have Riley's put it on Twitter. There's a girl at Harvard who has been in contact with both of us, and obviously on our side on this issue, shared the letter.
Did a lot of
I
that
mean,
stuff
it's
change after school? Like after you guys all graduated and stuff? Is it like,
well, interestingly, I mean, my team was almost 40 girls. Only three of my teammates have reached out to me saying that they support my
wow.
stance. And I certainly had more than three girls I was having conversations with before that team meeting when they really shut us all down.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it was just again like thinking about how much you go to college to find a job, right? I mean that's the point. I like there's really no what why else would you spend thousands of dollars on an education, right? You'd like want to get a job, and if you think for some reason that's going to be put into jeopardy because you speak up over something like this, I mean, for most people, that's not worth it.
Yeah.
I wish that weren't the case, but it's just reality. And I think a lot of people also don't necessarily have like the stomach for this type of stuff. I mean, I've received a lot of hate for speaking out about this, and I think a lot, and people are aware of that. I mean, they saw how much name calling there was even like amongst other people on the team that disagreed with each other. Like imagine that just like super large scale. I think a lot of people just aren't ready to put themselves into that situation.
Yeah. Speaking of which, you guys got to go follow Paula on all of her socials, TikTok, Instagram. Where else are you, Paula?
Yeah, mostly just Twitter. I feel like Twitter is
Yeah.
like the big one. Thank you, Elon. Honestly, though, that is something I will say. Twitter has really been huge for this issue in particular. Like we've been able to talk about news stories that have been suppressed for so long. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
be thankful that we have that outlet.
Definitely. Yeah. Twitter is amazing. That's where I've been pretty, active. A lot of the people watching right now are on Twitter. So did Leah know that there were girls on the team who sort of didn't like that she was on the team or didn't like certain parts of her being on the team or him being on the team? Correct
Yeah,
myself.
I mean, there's interviews. There's like an ABC interview, and like in the interview, Leah was basically just saying like, and those people who object to me, like that's their problem. I'm happy now.
Oh, wow. Calling
And
him
that was
out.
always the conversation. And to me that like that's upsetting because I don't agree with the other side on this, but at least I can understand where you might be coming from, right? I can understand like maybe you do actually believe that you're a woman and think you're entitled to all this stuff, and I'm willing to hear you out. But from the opposing side on this issue, like there wasn't really a lot of like hearing out us being uncomfortable in the locker room or hearing out that we didn't think that it was fair that he was winning all of these events by seconds or
Yeah.
bumping somebody off the roster or the relay or whatever it might be. There was just no room for that. It was if you even bring up that concern in any way, shape, or form, no matter how mild, you're still the problem.
Yeah.
And again, that was like reiterated to us by the university, by other students, by even professors in courses that were teaching material that was very similar to this, right? It was always if you object in any way, shape, or form, no matter how slight, you're hateful, you're a bigot, you're the problem.
Yeah. Was there ever like a shift in the admin where they started to support you guys more, or it always just remained that way? I guess maybe that's why you're only so many of your teammates reached out.
I no, there was no shift at all. In fact, at the end of the season, the University of Pennsylvania decided to nominate Leah for NCAA Woman of the Year.
Wow.
Each school gets a handful of nominees, very small number, and it's huge. They do it at the NCAA convention. It's this huge deal. The women who are finalists get invited. It's like this whole ordeal, and they chose to nominate Leah Thomas as NCAA Woman of the Year instead of all the other female athletes that would have been more than qualified to be nominated.
Wow.
So I think, I mean, they were doubling down on it, really. They also continued to highlight Thomas's accomplishments on like the UPenn Instagrams. They were sending, newsletters out saying how great and progressive it was. I mean, they loved the media attention of it. They loved it and they supported it, and they didn't, again, consider any of our feelings really at all.
How did that affect team morale?
I mean, it was as bad as you could expect. It was really tough situation. I mean, like again, for a lot of people either just said like I don't want to deal with it. I just want to focus on me and your own swimming or whatever. There were people who were fighting with each other. I mean, I had some pretty nasty encounters with some of my teammates. And I remember like this one time when my assistant coaches had to get involved and was like, you can't say things that are that mean to your teammates and expect them to have a good relationship with you. And so there was a lot of sort of back and forth and tension and sort of finger pointing on who had what opinion or who was saying what to whom. I mean, again, it was a distraction more than anything else. I think that's really the worst part about it is just how distracting it really was.
Did anyone leave the team as a result of it, or everybody just stuck it out?
No, I think it was also there was a lot of people who left early in the season because again we had a gap year from COVID, so a lot of people hadn't really been swimming actively for a year because again like the COVID restrictions, especially on pools, were in a lot of states were very harsh. And so there were a lot of people who just sort of were like, I'm done with this because of just the time that had passed. Again, there was just so many different moving parts that season, not just this situation, but again, coming back from COVID, going back to classes in person from being online for a year and a half.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of different other factors on top of just there's a man on the women's swim team.
Yeah. So I have one more question before we wrap up. What would, and I'm just thinking of this on the fly, do you have any kind of like solution that you would propose for this issue? Like how to prevent these things from happening or like what to do about them?
I mean, yeah, I think that we just need to have sex-based sports categories, right? If you're male, you're on the men's team. If you're female, you're on the women's team.
You don't really? You think that's crazy that you think that's very interesting. It's
What do you
almost
think
like,
the solution should be?
oh, I don't know. That just seems too obvious.
Well, okay, so what
You
I
don't
will
say.
what I will say though is at the beginning I was thinking about maybe we could have a middle category, right, or like an other category.
Yeah.
And that was like first thoughts, trying to be like a nice person, 21 years old, whatever. They have tried this now.
Oh, they have,
multiple
really?
categories. Yes, they had it in actually World Championship swimming. Okay, and nobody joined. Nobody joined.
Of course
And then
not.
In marathon running, they have a non-binary category, and if you go look at the results, every person who's winning is either a man or a woman that's taking testosterone.
Yeah.
So it's not, and it's just the third category is just another place for male athletes to be highlighted. So that's not a viable solution. And there are people who still make that argument. They say, well, we should give them the third category. There is no point in doing that. Nobody also, if you for some reason want to compete in the men's team and you need to wear a women's suit because that makes you happy or whatever,
Yeah.
be my guest. You can put on a women's suit. I don't care. Whatever, change the rules, make that be allowed. I could care less.
Exactly.
I think that this is the only solution really that works. But again, they don't want that because they want this women's category. And I will add one more thing. What we've noticed is there's now some women who identify as men competing in college sports and amateur level and all these different categories of sports. And they are still competing on women's swim teams or women's sports teams. At the NCAA championship that Thomas swam at, there was a woman who identified as a man who is still competing in the women's category. If their identity is so, their sport is so important to their identity or whatever, why are they still in the women's category then, right? So it's a lot of women now that are saying they identify as men, and they're
Totally agree
and so
with you.
and I think that it's enough evidence.
If there was like credible evidence that would point to like it's actually a thing, right? Like it's actually a thing. I still don't think it's not about what's going on in your head. It's about what's going on in your physical attributes, and it's not fair to cut off women by allowing you to compete against them when you have superior physical attributes. But yeah,
and it's every cell in your body has a sex. It's your Y chromosome is in every cell of your body. So even if they suppress your testosterone for a year, doesn't change your bones. It doesn't change the size of your heart, the size of your lungs, your height, your bone density, all of these different factors. And I think a lot of people didn't really realize that upon looking at these rules and making the rules. And so again, those factors as of now cannot be changed. And if it would be the most invasive surgery humanly possible to make a man fully equivalent to a woman, because again, it's in every cell in your body.
Yeah, it would be like impossible. You'd have to like chemically alter every part of your body. Yeah. Okay, well, plug all of your stuff real quick before we wrap up. Everybody needs to go follow Paula. She doesn't get enough love. She gets too much hate. So go support her.
I'm just Paula Y. Scanlan on all platforms. But I appreciate your time, Cam, and I appreciate
Of
you
course.
diving into issues that, not everyone wants to talk about. So I appreciate you.
Of course, I appreciate